Welcome to Church and State, where we boldly take on the collision of two topics that often brings about energetic and polarizing discussions: politics and religion. You can't talk about it at the dinner table. It can get heated at the barbershop. But we're going to talk about it right here. This is episode number 1 of our podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
I am New York State Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, representing New York State's 55th Assembly District, which includes Brownsville, Brooklyn, where I was born and raised. I'm a mother, a lawyer, and a criminal justice warrior. I'm the architect of the Bail Reform Bill in New York State, the Assembly sponsor of the landmark John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act of New York, a big proponent of fairness, justice, and equity in our criminal legal system, and securing state funds for underserved communities.
And I am Reverend Dr. Robert Waterman, a pastor, business owner, and community leader in Brooklyn. I'm the president of the African American Clergy and Elected Official Organizations, or the AACEO, which seeks to strengthen ties among clergy, community stakeholders, and elected officials with the shared goal of addressing issues of importance to communities of color. I'm the pastor of Antioch Baptist Church in Brooklyn. I'm a husband, a father, and proudly put God first in everything I do.
And together we are Church and State. Great. Reverend Waterman, this is a long time coming. It's a culmination of conversations that we've had over the course of years. I think we've known each other now for maybe about 15 years.
Yes, that's about the correct time across the spectrum. And you've been various positions, and now the Assemblywoman that you are now.
Let me tell you, and over the last couple of hours, my role as Secretary to the State Party has really been, I think, highlighted even more. And this is a great time to be in politics, to be a Black woman, and to see that there is a Black woman who is a sister in Divine Nine, a member who is at the top of the ticket. And so it feels really, really great. And I'm glad that now we have an opportunity for our friends, our family, our constituents, our parishioners to kind of take part in these discussions that we have, where sometimes the idea of church and state sort of meets at a fork in the road. And sometimes we can travel it together, and sometimes we just got to figure out how do we bring each other back to reality, if you will. And so again, thank you very much.
You're so welcome. It has been a long time coming, and I'm a novice to podcasting, but one thing I do, I know Jesus.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. And everyone will get to be able to see just how much Jesus is really, he is exhibited in everything that you do, even up to and including the other day someone told me, oh, let me tell you, at the community board, oh, he doesn't vote for anything that involves alcohol. And so anytime, if you're on that economic development committee meeting, just know he has a certain reputation. And can you tell me a little bit about why?
Because the fact is that I believe that the Black community, the Black and Brown community, has been infiltrated or saturated with the vices, that causes our people not to think, to respond differently. And if you saturate from all the way from alcoholism and the legalization of alcohol, the prohibition and all that, to now even the legalization of cannabis, that is just one subject that I'm just, and as you know, even our community board 3, the cannabis now has replaced alcohol. Every time I'm turning around, there's a cannabis shop opening, wanting to be licensed. And I do fully understand about economic growth, but I also believe that it should not be on the back of our people. And that's why every chance I get, I vote alcohol and cannabis down.
Well, let me tell you, the same thing. I used to be on the Economic Development Committee in the Assembly. And I think that eventually they got into a point where it was like, maybe we should find something else for her to do because myself, as well as Assembly member Charles Barron, I think we would generally usually know when it comes to that topic as well, because it's like of all of the things that we could be doing, which includes economic development. Why is this usually the only avenue that gets presented? And so, I remember even when they were talking about increasing the hour, and this will be a good segue, increasing the hour that a restaurant can begin to serve alcohol on a Sunday. Sort of came up as one of our votes, and I don't remember if it was like during budget or whatever that time was, but I know it was during a crunch. And during the committee meeting, I said, you know what, folk are like, maybe this is something that they want to do. Okay, I'll vote yes for this. And I had a strict record of like not voting yes for anything as it related to alcohol. So much so that the chairman of the committee like looked at me and he says, Ms. Walker, are you aware of your vote? I was like, okay, I can't do it. Put me down. I'm down on this. And so I understand, right? And so again, a lot of times there is an interesting cross-section as it relates to this. And so I know one of the conversations that we've had, and I want to establish a baseline for the conversation that we're having. I think we should define the idea of church and state, which generally evokes thoughts of the separation of church and state. While the concept has been around in the United States since Roger Williams, the founder of Rhode Island, alluded to it in the 1600s, Thomas Jefferson is credited with coining the phrase wall of separation between church and state. Jefferson wrote that in a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association in Connecticut in the 1800s. The separation of church and state was codified in the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. It was widely interpreted in this first clause of the Bill of Rights that the government could pass no laws respecting an establishment of religion. In other words, Congress could pass no laws that would infringe upon the separation of church and state. The Supreme Court has repeatedly been called upon to interpret this separation, the banning of prayer in public schools, challenging the display of the Ten Commandments on the grounds of the state capitol in Texas, and using public funds for religious schools. Now, Reverend Waterman, how do you view the concept of the separation of church and state, and what impact has it had on society?
We've had this discussion before, and I kind of sort of want to work my way backwards because I think I missed that piece, where it says the last phase you said using public funds for religious schools. My question to the state would be, don't the people who go to the schools go to church? And if we are talking about religious schools, then we gotta make sure that we're not just talking about the Protestant faith. Are we talking about our Jewish faith, our Muslim faith? So if religious instructions is a part of the upbringing and the values of that community, why is it that when it comes down to the Protestant faith, the focus on separation, but not with our Jewish and Muslim faith, there is no focus on separation. So when we talk about using funds, the Jewish, Protestant, and Muslim people work and get taxed the same way non-religious people work and get taxed. So the tax money that is used to fund, quote unquote, schools are the same money, unless the state is going to say, we're going to separate the tax money that we collect from all the religious people and say, here's your pocket of money that can fund your educational schools because you have your faith tied to the educational system of your children. Until state does that, state does not have a right to say that you got to separate the fund. We won't fund a school that teaches religious instructions, because what you're saying now is that the public schools, we took the prayer out because of a select group of people who desires prayer not to be a part of the educational system of our kids for morals and values and correction and having a God-like mindset. And so what do we produce? The question that the state need to ask themselves when it comes down to the educational perspective, what are we trying to produce? Are we producing the next generation without a godly sense of moral or values, or are we just producing what they see today? Brothers killing brothers, the gun violence, and everything else that's happening in our community because we're pulling away from what we call God. So the separation of church and state, even when Jefferson did it, it was because there was a collision between state wanting to regulate the church. And now because it can't regulate the church, we won't fund the church. That's why the 501c3 came into existence, which is corporation through London, President Lyndon Johnson's time, and then the 508c1a, which is the faith-based organization, which both of them actually still holds the same standard of tax exemption and yet the same benefits that the 501c3, except getting involved in elections. And if you see and begin to dissect the legislations and the laws that come, the First Amendment was only clarified to say you cannot, as the state, regulate the rules and the practice of a religious organization. You cannot infringe upon telling them what to do, how to teach. Like when I go pray from City Hall to the state, I couldn't use Jesus, and I couldn't pray and use Jesus. And I had to submit my prayer before I'm accepted to pray. And I had to generalize it. But I often look at the other religions and say from our Jewish religion and Muslim religion, they don't ignore or delete Allah, Adonai, or any structure of God that is mentioned from their prayers. And matter of fact, I've listened to enough that some of them don't even pray. They give you a synopsis and a speech so that it's not confusing with I'm blessing you. And some of us, when we listen to the prayers of our Muslim brothers or Jewish brothers, you don't get that clarity from my perspective of are they praying, or am I just reading you a piece of litany that says A, B, C, and D, E, F, G. But if you're asking somebody to pray, which is a different thing. So church and state for me, do you have someone as yourself to leave your morals, your values, your religious upbringing outside of the capital of Albany before you walk through those doors? Do half of you stay home before you walk through those doors? Or do you take your fullness? Because you were not elected, half of you. You were elected with all your belief. You were elected with how you feel about God, your religious experience, your community. That you were elected as a full being. Then when you get into the state, now as a legislator, I can't use that. That bids me questions about why Obama, our President Obama, had to deny Pastor Jeremiah Wright, and then he couldn't be Muslim. He couldn't be radical Christian. He had to be silent if he wanted to be president.
Now, is it that he had to be silent, or is it, more so that there's just certain maybe positions, if you will, that his pastor was entitled to make as a man, as a pastor, that, I believe if President Obama sort of subscribed to those positions, he wouldn't I mean, some people show up in politics as their authentic selves,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I believe if there was something, even if it was controversial, right, and you jump out the window on something, if I believe in what you're saying, I don't have a problem with jumping out that window with you.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not something that I subscribe to, then sometimes I'm just like, hold on. I don't think there should have been an all out denouncing of an individual. I don't believe in cancel culture like that. I believe that people have a right to espouse their ideas and be who they are. And of course, a lot of times politics is a lot about perception. And so I think that, for me, like you said, we bring our morals, our convictions to our work. And I guess one of the things that I always go back to is, criminal justice sort of being my thing and growing up in Brownsville and, having policing, play such a huge role in what society is and does, looking at the levels of crime, which takes place within the communities, whether it's in our schools, whether it's in our homes, whether it's on our streets. And then, of course, what does it, 120 Skimmerhorn, a criminal court, like what does that look like? And even becoming an attorney, there were a number of things that sort of went into that. But of course, looking at what was happening with everyone with respect to criminal justice, it was just something always big for me. And so when I pray, when I'm in Albany, particularly when I have to go in and debate, one of the things that I think about is Lamentations, chapter 3:34. I will just, of course, the King James Version is very wordy in a way that we have to sort of interpret it. But the way that I like to read the New Century Version, and it basically says, if he sees a prisoner of the earth, if any prisoner of the earth is crushed under his feet, he sees if someone is treated unfairly before the Most High God. The Lord sees if someone is cheated in his case in court. And, King James says, to subvert a man in his cause, the Lord approveth not. And so again, that means if this person is denied justice, then that's something that's frowned upon by God. And in the middle of, let's say, even when I was introducing bail reform, and we passed it, and it was because people were saying, oh, well, I will always remember the time when there was a woman who came into the office. She needed to pay bail for her brother, and she didn't have the money by which to be able to do so. And when she was trying to figure out what to do, we were able to get the bail fund to pay bail. I said, just take this down, go downtown. They put a $1 hold on him. Go downtown and pay the $1 hold. And she said she didn't have the car fare to get downtown. He had to get to court. He had to get back to his family. And quite frankly, they were holding him because they wanted to question him, not necessarily because he actually did anything super egregious. He was sort of caught up in a chain of whether or not someone had a weapon in their hand. And he didn't have it, but he was along in the chain. And so as we're having this conversation, people are like, oh, crime is going crazy and crime is this and this is happening across the state and this is happening in our subway system. And at the end of the day, it's like this is a lot of rhetoric. A lot of it is not steeped in truth. It's not steeped in reality. It doesn't follow along with the numbers that we're seeing in terms of crime going down across our city, but the media is telling us that it's going up. But everyone is like, we need to curtail bail reform, and they're saying it in the church, and we got a lot of church folk who are like, you know what, we need to get rid of this thing. And it's like, but wait, what about Lamentations chapter 3?
Mm-hmm.
What about, what it is that the Bible says and speaks to about criminal justice and criminal justice reform? Like, what is it that I'm missing? And so sometimes even my own convictions kind of get, sort of caught up in popularity, in perception, in the fact that many politicians believe that they're only as great as their most recent election. And so, it creates an interesting dynamic, I know for me. One of the other things that we had talked about, funding in schools. Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily believe that it's about funding the actual school per se, because we fund as a state parochial or religious-based schools. Mm-hmm. It's the instruction that sort of creates the nuance. There's 100% funding for STEM in education, in private schools, in parochial schools, in religious-based schools. There's also funding for some of the sort of instrumentalities of the building, cameras, safety issues, computer labs, science labs. All of those things are opportunities for religious schools to be able to receive funding from the state. Where the conundrum sort of falls into is with respect to the instruction. So now we are not allowed to fund religious-based instruction within that time period. I've never been to a religious-based school, so I don't really know whether or not there's a separate time for Bible study, if you will. And if there is, to the extent that there is not necessarily a blank check that the state can give in order to do that. I don't know if there's a particular time during the day, if it's like, studying the Torah or studying the Quran. But to whatever extent it is, the idea behind it is that state funds cannot be utilized in order to support that type of instruction. However, the other levels, teacher certifications, a number of other things that schools will avail themselves of, the state is still available. The state education department is still available for those opportunities.
So what you're really saying is that anything that teaches history should not be funded.
I don't think it's history, the Bible is 100% a history book.
It's a history book. So anything that's history should not be so that's why they don't teach about slavery, because it can't be funded. I guess that's why there's so many things that are cut out of the education of our black and brown children. So the Jewish community reminds their children where they come from. The Muslim community reminds their children how they got where they are. It's the Protestant faith that deals especially with the black and brown students who we have the worst educational system in our communities, and yet anything that deals with slavery, God, or anything else need to not be taught to our children. We want to teach you math. We want you to read at a third grade level. We want you not to get involved in community of STEM of any type of level until you get to college, when you're not able to comprehend the knowledge at that level. But yet, we ain't gonna fund you. We don't even fund you to equalize you with white institutions. And we want to do this major, okay, let's level the playing field. Everybody get the same money. How can you actually tell me I'm going to be equal with you when I started a lap behind you, and you want me to catch you with the same amount of energy that the person in front of me got?
I agree. And I never said that I believed in equality. I believe in equity. And sometimes some people need, a longer ladder than others in order to sort of be at the same playing field, if you will. But one of the things that I do want to stress, though, is that there is not an opportunity, again, where religious-based schooling does not gain access to local dollars for educational funding.
But I'm a religious person. Don't tax me. So you're saying to me, as somebody who's religious, I'm not going to teach your kids, and I don't want you to teach your kids about your experience as a religious person, but I'm going to tax you so that the white community or any other community can get my tax money to teach them.
But who would come in? So if schools have certain certifications, right? Like if I'm a math teacher, I got math certifications. This is my thing. I can come in and teach your child math. How would you certify, or what would be the mechanism, if you will, to certify someone coming in to teach religion? And now, would we have to certify a particular religion from every particular faith to come into a school at certain levels or at certain opportunities?
No, because when I have a doctorate, my doctorate is broad. It's not just my Protestant faith. How do you think I know about the Israel? How do you think I knew about Muslim? How do you think I knew about other religious community? Because when we learn, just like you learn as an English teacher, as a math teacher, as a speech teacher, as an engineer, we learn across the board. It's not just we teach you about our religion, we teach you about religion. And religious studies is broad. So if you're gonna input this in your children, so we say, oh, don't teach them nothing because we don't know how. Then why in the world would I get a doctorate in religion and I cannot effectively use it until I get to grad school? And then that's when you want to teach your kids about religion? It's too late. They smoking weed and everything else in undergrad. They throwing wild parties and drinking in undergrad. By the time they get out of high school, we want to talk about pro this, pro that, women's right, and all that. But religious education teaches women how to keep themselves to themselves until a husband come or somebody who's worthy of having them.
Right, but that's your interpretation of that. Okay. Not everyone, right? Not everyone subscribes to those beliefs, right? I grew up Baptist. Yes, that's the way that I was taught. And notwithstanding the fact that I went to Sunday school every Sunday morning, Wednesday night Bible study. You know, my uncle was the pastor. My mom was the chairwoman on the deaconess board and all these things. It doesn't mean that it prevented me or I didn't still succumb to some of the ways of the world, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so just because that instruction, which came from church, not necessarily from school, but it doesn't mean that we still aren't, availing ourselves of those things. And so, but I think though it still sort of takes away from the idea regarding education. Let's say, as my dad used to say, reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Right.
And so those are the things that are funded through our educational experiences.
But that is reading, writing, and arithmetic. Just because I took all my math courses, I didn't become an accountant.
Right.
So you could use every aspect from English to math to history to say, just because we learned all of this, we still succumb to the world, right?
Right.
Imagine all those same kids that went and learned how to add 1 + 1 became drug dealers out on the street.
Well, let me tell you, they can calculate grams better than
that's what I'm talking about.
Most pharmacists or anyone else I know.
So when you put something in somebody, one thing that I've learned even through history of religion and everything else, once somebody learns something, you can't take it out of them. The issue that I'm having is that white America does not want black people to learn nothing. Thank you all for joining us here at Church and State, because together we are Church and State.
Thank you again, everyone, for listening. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And in the words of Nelson Mandela, it always seems impossible until it's done. Thank you so much.